The neighbors, meanwhile, offered accounts that added complexity to the story. They described hearing loud voices in the evenings, doors slamming, and footsteps echoing through the hallways at odd hours. Some spoke of Nathan's temper, noting times when he stormed out of the house or shouted during arguments. Others described Celia's calm attempts to de-escalate tensions, often standing quietly in hallways, her expressions betraying worry. Victor, in contrast, was described as more authoritative, often issuing firm commands and struggling to tolerate dissent. These observations, when combined, painted a picture of a family in which love and tension coexisted uneasily, setting the stage for the catastrophic events to come. Even beyond the mansion, the Reinhardt family's influence in Hollywood magnified every action, every secret, every whisper. Studio executives, agents, and colleagues watched events unfold with a mix of horror and fascination. Rumors of conflicts over contracts, film rights, and creative control swirled, hinting that professional pressures may have contributed to personal tension. While it would be impossible to draw a direct line from business disputes to the tragedy, the intersections of fame, wealth, and power created an environment where grievances could fester, unseen and unresolved. As the investigation deepened, detectives discovered a series of cryptic phone messages and emails. Some were mundane, reminders about appointments, meetings, or family obligations. Others were far more troubling, hinting at underlying tension, resentment, or desperation. One message, in particular, stood out, a line that suggested Nathan felt trapped, unheard, and invisible within his own family. Whether this message represented mere frustration or a warning of something far more dangerous became a central question for investigators and the public alike. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the Nathan they knew with the Nathan accused. Some remembered moments of kindness, moments of creativity, moments of humor that seemed at odds with the dark allegations. Others recalled warning signs, moments that now, in hindsight, appeared ominous. The duality of perception. How a person could appear loving and troubled simultaneously became a recurring theme in media coverage, social commentary, and public discussion. Yet even as the layers of family tension, financial pressure, and emotional turmoil came to light, one mystery remained. Why that night? Why the moment that changed everything? Detectives and psychologists alike pondered this question, exploring triggers, catalysts, and environmental factors. Was it a long-planned act, a sudden eruption of suppressed anger, or something more sinister? And crucially, what could have been done to prevent it? The chapter closes with an ominous discovery. Among Nathan's belongings, investigators found an envelope, carefully tucked behind a stack of old photographs. Its contents were shocking: drawings, notes, and scribbles that suggested a mind wrestling with thoughts too heavy to express in words alone. The envelope offered a glimpse into the psychological state that may have driven Nathan toward the unimaginable, yet it raised more questions than it answered. What did these cryptic messages mean? Who, if anyone, could have interpreted them before it was too late? And perhaps most chilling of all, were these signs of a larger, hidden turmoil that extended beyond the walls of the Reinhardt mansion? The answers to these questions would slowly emerge, each revelation more disturbing than the last. And just when it seemed the first pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, detectives uncovered another layer of secrets, a connection that no one had anticipated and that would turn the story on its head. By the third day after the tragedy, the Reinhardt mansion had become a fortress of questions. Media vans lined the quiet streets of Brentwood, their satellite dishes pointing skyward as journalists scrambled for the smallest detail. Helicopters hovered overhead, a constant reminder that the world was watching, waiting, and speculating. Inside, the once majestic estate felt suffocating, the walls echoing memories of laughter, arguments, and now, horror. What no one outside those walls fully realized was that the Reinhardt family had long been grappling with conflicts that were invisible to the public eye. Friends and acquaintances often described the Reinhardts as a perfect Hollywood family, but perfection, as the saying goes, is often a facade. The reality, now emerging through interviews, notes, and recovered documents, was far more complicated, far darker, and far more human than the public had imagined. Nathan's adolescence and early adulthood had been marked by exceptional talent intertwined with extreme volatility. While he was undeniably bright, capable of remarkable insights and artistic expression, his behavior often veered into unpredictable extremes. School records and tutors' notes revealed both praise and caution, remarks about brilliance counterbalanced by observations of mood swings, intense anger, and periods of withdrawal. In hindsight, these were signs of a young man struggling to reconcile his identity with the towering expectations of a powerful family. Meanwhile, the relationship between Victor and Nathan had been increasingly strained. Victor, the family patriarch, was a man accustomed to control in the boardroom, on film sets, and even in his household. To him, order was paramount, and deviation from his expectations often met with stern disapproval. Nathan, naturally independent and fiercely intelligent, frequently pushed against these boundaries. What may have seemed like minor disagreements to outsiders were, in reality, intense conflicts that escalated in private, leaving emotional scars that only deepened over time. Celia, the matriarch, had been the family's emotional anchor for years, a calming presence amid the chaos. She often attempted to mediate, to soften conflicts and preserve familial harmony. But even her patience had limits. Friends later described moments when she retreated into silence, her attempts at peace thwarted by escalating arguments between her husband and son. Celia's own notes, later discovered by investigators, suggested a deep awareness of underlying tensions, a quiet fear that something terrible might occur if issues were left unresolved. The mansion itself revealed subtle evidence of these family dynamics. Rooms bore traces of hurried departures or hidden conflicts. In the library, books were slightly out of place, suggesting frustration or searching. The living room showed signs of recent arguments, minor disturbances hinting at anger or tension. Small details, seemingly mundane, became crucial pieces of the puzzle, providing investigators with a timeline of emotional energy within the household. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives discovered a series of cryptic correspondences that painted a picture of long-term psychological strain. Nathan had exchanged notes and messages with a circle of friends and confidants, some of whom expressed concern over his mental state. There were mentions of feeling trapped, unheard, and invisible, phrases that might seem ordinary but, when examined collectively, revealed a deeply troubled mindset. These messages suggested not only anger and frustration, but also a sense of alienation, a perception that the world, including his family, failed to see him fully. Lila, the daughter, became a key source of insight. Her interviews revealed a young woman caught between love, loyalty, and horror. She recalled instances of whispered arguments at night, subtle signs of tension that she had dismissed in her youth. She described moments when Nathan's mood seemed to shift without warning, periods of intense isolation, and times when Victor's authority clashed violently with Nathan's independence. These recollections offered investigators vital context, illustrating how emotional patterns within the family may have laid the groundwork for the tragedy that followed. Financial pressures added another layer of complexity. While the Reinards were undeniably wealthy, internal disagreements over money, investments, and inheritance expectations created friction. Nathan reportedly felt constrained by his parents' control over finances and his role within the family business. Correspondence and text messages later revealed disputes over decisions that, to Nathan, felt like an infringement on autonomy and personal agency. Investigators considered whether these disputes, while not directly violent, contributed to escalating resentment and emotional tension. In addition to familial strain, outside influences played a role. Hollywood, a city built on appearances, power, and reputation, exerted constant pressure on the Reinard family. Agents, business partners, and industry colleagues added expectations, deadlines, and scrutiny, compounding the family's internal stress. Nathan, in particular, may have felt the weight of this external gaze, struggling to maintain personal identity amid the demands of family legacy and public expectation. Even the smallest details of daily life reflected underlying tensions. Staff members and neighbors later recounted peculiar observations. Moments of silence broken by heated whispers, unusual comings and goings at odd hours, and small disruptions within the mansion that suggested hidden conflicts. Each account, when combined with physical evidence and recovered communications, created a layered portrait of a household fraught with tension, anxiety, and the potential for catastrophe. The night of the tragedy itself revealed additional complexities. Investigators noted subtle disturbances in multiple rooms, suggesting movement, conflict, and possibly an emotional struggle. Although the exact sequence of events would remain under investigation for months, these small signs provided clues about the emotional state of the family and the intensity of the interactions leading up to the incident. Each clue raised questions. Had the confrontation been planned, or did it erupt spontaneously? What role did prior emotional conflicts play in the escalation? And most importantly, could anyone have anticipated the horror that followed? Just when it seemed that the investigators were beginning to assemble a coherent picture, they discovered something deeply unsettling. Evidence suggesting that Nathan may have been aware of potential consequences but unable to control the trajectory of his actions. Personal notes hinted at a psychological struggle, a battle between rational thought and overwhelming emotion. Experts called it a portrait of a mind at war with itself, and it raised troubling questions about the nature of responsibility, intention, and human behavior. Friends of Nathan struggled to reconcile this version of him with the person they believed they knew. He had shown kindness, creativity, and humor, but these traits coexisted with frustration, anger, and feelings of isolation. This duality, the simultaneous capacity for warmth and violence, became a central theme in public discussion and media coverage, challenging simple narratives about the tragedy. How can one person embody such extremes? How can love and fear coexist so tightly within a single individual? As the chapter closes, a new discovery rocked the investigation. Hidden within a seldom-used room of the mansion, detectives found a collection of documents, notes, and sketches that pointed to long-standing psychological distress. The items suggested not only anger and resentment, but also confusion, fear, and perhaps a sense of inevitability. Whoever created them had been grappling with internal conflict for months, maybe years, and now the world would see its consequences. The chilling question remained. Had anyone recognized these warning signs before it was too late? Could this tragedy have been prevented? And as authorities pieced together the story, one thought loomed over every decision, every interview, and every clue. The Reinhardt family was not just a household. It was a house of secrets, and every secret carried the potential for devastating consequences. But just as investigators began to focus on these new findings, they stumbled upon something even more shocking. A discovery that would rewrite the narrative entirely, a secret that no one could have anticipated, and a twist that would leave everyone wondering what really happened in the Reinhardt mansion that night. By the fourth day following the tragedy, the Reinhardt mansion had become more than a crime scene. It was a symbol of secrecy, tension, and the hidden lives of Hollywood elites. Every creaking floorboard, every closed door, every overlooked corner seemed to whisper the story of a family that had lived under the weight of unspoken truths. And as investigators delved deeper, they realized the surface narrative, the family known to the world, was only part of the story. Beneath it lay a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal that no one could have anticipated. It began with the discovery of communication records. Emails, texts, and messages that revealed a history of hidden conflicts. Some messages were mundane, seemingly routine reminders of social events or business dealings. Others were cryptic, loaded with emotion, hints of resentment, and veiled threats. Certain exchanges between Nathan and acquaintances suggested a growing sense of isolation, frustration, and anger that had intensified over months. For investigators, these communications painted a picture of a young man struggling to reconcile his own identity with the expectations of a family and a city that demanded perfection. Celia and Victor, despite their polished public personas, were not immune to these tensions. Friends revealed that behind closed doors, disagreements over money, career choices, and lifestyle had long simmered beneath the veneer of a harmonious family. Victor, who had spent decades cultivating influence and authority, had little patience for what he perceived as rebellion or failure. Celia, ever the mediator, often found herself navigating a delicate balance between maintaining peace and asserting her own perspective. Yet even her patience had limits, and the family dynamic had reached a point where arguments, though often subtle, were emotionally charged and increasingly frequent. Nathan's isolation had become more pronounced in the months leading up to the tragedy. Teachers, tutors, and friends noted his withdrawal, his reluctance to engage in conversation, and his tendency to retreat into solitude. At the same time, moments of brilliance and charm persisted, making his behavior seem inconsistent and unpredictable. This duality, the coexistence of warmth and volatility, left those around him unsure how to respond. Could intervention have prevented the eventual tragedy, or was it a culmination of forces beyond anyone's control? The mansion itself provided clues about the underlying conflict. Investigators noted subtle disturbances throughout the house. A chair pushed aside as if in anger, a book left open in the middle of a sentence, and faint marks on walls that suggested hurried movement. Each detail, when examined in context, revealed the emotional turbulence that had been building quietly for years. Even the layout of the rooms, the separation of personal spaces, the closed doors, the locked cabinets, suggested boundaries and barriers that may have contributed to misunderstanding, frustration, and isolation. Outside the mansion, the broader community began to piece together the implications of the tragedy. Neighbors recounted moments that, in retrospect, seemed ominous. Raised voices echoing through the halls late at night, hurried exits from the house, and brief but intense confrontations that were quickly hushed. Friends of the family described Nathan's increasing detachment, his reluctance to participate in family events, and a subtle but growing tension between him and Victor. Each anecdote, though small in isolation, contributed to a portrait of a household fraught with conflict, pressure, and unspoken grievances. The financial dimension of the family dynamic also came under scrutiny. Although the Reinards were wealthy, their fortune had become a source of tension rather than comfort. Inheritance disputes, disagreements over investments, and conflicts about the future of the family's business empire had intensified the emotional strain. Nathan, who had long felt constrained by his parents' expectations, reportedly expressed frustration over what he perceived as control and limitation. These disputes, while not directly violent, may have fueled resentment and contributed to the psychological state that led to the night of the tragedy. The investigation uncovered additional evidence of secrecy, hidden journals, coded messages, and private notes tucked away in personal spaces. Nathan had documented thoughts and emotions in ways that were both revealing and disturbing. Anger, confusion, fear, and resentment were interwoven with moments of reflection, regret, and even guilt. These writings suggested a complex internal struggle, a battle between emotion and rational thought, that ultimately may have influenced his actions. Investigators noted that these documents were critical to understanding not just the events themselves, but the psychological landscape in which they occurred. Lila, the daughter, provided crucial insights into the family's hidden conflicts. In interviews, she described subtle signs of tension she had witnessed over the years. Hushed arguments, fleeting expressions of frustration, and moments when Nathan's behavior seemed inexplicably volatile. She recounted times when Celia's attempts to mediate fell short, and when Victor's strict authority only escalated conflicts. These observations, though seemingly minor at the time, formed an essential context for understanding the emotional dynamics that may have contributed to the night's tragic events. Hollywood's glare added yet another layer of complexity. The Reinards were not just a family. They were a public institution, scrutinized by media, peers, and fans alike. This constant attention amplified existing tensions, making private disagreements feel public and private failures seem monumental. Agents, producers, and industry colleagues exerted pressures that compounded the family's internal struggles. In a world where image and reputation were paramount, the personal and professional boundaries often blurred, creating fertile ground for conflict. The chapter reaches a turning point with the discovery of a hidden folder on a private computer. Its contents were shocking: drafts of letters, half-finished diaries, and carefully composed notes revealing long-standing grievances, moments of despair, and cryptic warnings. The writing suggested not just anger toward Victor and Celia, but a deep sense of alienation from the world around him. Each page offered a glimpse into a mind grappling with emotions too intense to articulate, and into a family dynamic that may have been unknowingly pushing a loved one toward an unimaginable act. Friends and neighbors were left grappling with disbelief. How could someone so intelligent, creative, and loved by those closest to him commit such a violent act? And yet, the evidence painted a picture of a young man caught in a storm of pressure, expectation, and unresolved conflict, a storm that no one could fully understand until it had reached its terrifying climax. Let's be clear, this is not some abstract theory. History is full of examples where silence has maintained power for decades. Monarchies, corporate dynasties, political families, all rely on unspoken codes of discretion. And within these codes, individuals navigate a treacherous terrain. Every interaction is a calculated risk. Every casual comment can have unintended consequences. But why does this matter to our story? Because it sets the context for the alleged agreement between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, and why the alleged involvement of Sarah Ferguson is so consequential. In an orbit governed by unspoken rules, even a small deviation can have outsized effects. A single voice breaking silence can cascade through reputations, media narratives, and public perception. Let's examine some practical examples. Imagine an insider observing the alleged yacht encounter. They know something happened, or at least they suspect it. They also know there's a social understanding in place. No one talks about it. So they say nothing. They report nothing. And for a decade, nothing appears publicly. The system works because everyone assumes everyone else will adhere to the same code. But silence is rarely absolute. Leaks occur. Memory fails. Motivations change. And that's when the fragile equilibrium begins to wobble. Consider also the role of intermediaries. In royal orbit, communication is rarely direct. Messages are relayed through aides, advisors, or family members. The effect is twofold. It maintains plausible deniability, and it reinforces the seriousness of discretion. If someone must go through several layers to communicate, it reminds them of the stakes. One misstep along the chain can have dramatic consequences. At this point, you might ask, what happens when someone decides to speak despite the risks? That's where the real drama begins. Because in an environment so meticulously managed, breaking silence isn't just a personal decision, it's a social earthquake. It forces everyone else to respond, recontextualize past behavior, and potentially defend themselves. And that's the tension underlying the alleged yacht pact. The silence wasn't merely avoidance. It was a contract of mutual self-interest. Both parties allegedly understood that maintaining discretion preserved reputations, avoided public scrutiny, and prevented conflicts that could escalate uncontrollably. Now, let's add another layer: emotion. Silence is not emotionless. It carries fear, guilt, loyalty, and sometimes shame. Those emotions reinforce the agreement. A person may comply not just because they understand the practical stakes, but because breaking silence feels morally wrong, disloyal, or even dangerous. Over time, this creates an almost Pavlovian conditioning. The mere act of considering speaking triggers anxiety. The habit of discretion becomes reflexive, and the alleged pact on that yacht, in effect, becomes self-reinforcing. But here's the paradox. The same silence that protects can also imprison. While it shields reputations and maintains stability, it also prevents truth from surfacing, inhibits accountability, and allows unresolved tensions to fester. This is where loyalty can become complicity, and this is where our story's tension truly emerges. Because according to sources following these circles, the alleged yacht encounter created a situation where silence became a double-edged sword. For one person, it was protective. For another, it may have been confining. And as circumstances evolved over the following decade, the balance of benefits and risks shifted dramatically. It's also worth noting the audience's role. Public perception magnifies the stakes. Even if a secret is contained internally, the outside world interprets absence as consent, complicity, or concealment. That external pressure can gradually erode internal compliance, prompting someone to question whether continued silence is sustainable. And in some cases, that questioning can become catalytic. One person decides that speaking or hinting could serve their interests. And that single act can trigger a domino effect, forcing everyone else into a reactive posture. That's why insiders emphasize subtlety. Timing is everything. How, when, and to whom information is disclosed can determine whether reputations survive or collapse. And according to the rumors, such strategic calculations are exactly what made the alleged yacht silence pact both powerful and perilous. So, when we later discuss Sarah Ferguson allegedly breaking that silence, or questioning its enforceability, it isn't just gossip. It's a signal of seismic shifts within a highly controlled social ecosystem. And that's why what seems like a minor revelation can have monumental consequences. Silence, in this context, is more than the absence of speech. It's the mechanism by which behavior is managed, risks are mitigated, and reputations are protected. And breaking it, even partially, triggers a cascade that affects everyone connected, directly or indirectly. As we continue, you'll see how these principles of silence, discretion, and strategic communication allegedly govern the relationships and interactions at the center of our story. You'll begin to understand how a single unspoken rule can shape years of behavior, influence public perception, and become a weapon when leverage shifts. Because in environments where every word is measured and every gesture carries meaning, silence is not passive. It is active, it is deliberate, and it is, potentially, explosive. Imagine being on the sidelines of power for years, watching alliances shift, reputations rise and fall, and secrets pile up like unread letters in a vault. That's the world Sarah Ferguson has navigated for decades, a world where influence is fleeting, public perception is merciless, and silence is currency. And according to multiple sources, there came a moment when Ferguson allegedly decided that remaining silent was no longer tenable. The story begins, unsurprisingly, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with subtle signals. Small decisions, tiny shifts in behavior, a raised eyebrow here, a carefully worded comment there. Those familiar with her inner circle claim that Ferguson had long been aware of the alleged yacht encounter between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew. A moment that, for some reason, had been contained under layers of discretion for over a decade. But why speak now? What could have motivated Ferguson, often dismissed by the media as a peripheral figure, to potentially break that silence after all these years? First, we have to consider her history. Ferguson's public life has been a series of highs and lows. From the early days as the Duchess of York, she experienced immense attention, sometimes adoration, often criticism. Her personal missteps were scrutinized relentlessly, her privacy invaded repeatedly. In such a climate, one learns quickly that silence can be a shield, and speaking can be a trap. Yet Ferguson also understood the power of narrative. She had seen reputations rebuilt, diminished, and weaponized. She knew that when a story is controlled or withheld, it can be leveraged strategically. That understanding allegedly informed her approach to the alleged yacht incident. She didn't speak out impulsively. She didn't leak information recklessly. She calculated, she measured, she waited for the moment when the balance of risk and reward shifted decisively. So what changed? Why, after years of discretion, did Ferguson allegedly choose to break the code? According to insiders, the catalyst was twofold: shifting power dynamics and the erosion of protective layers. Over the last several years, public appetite for transparency has intensified. The world has grown less tolerant of ambiguity and more eager to dissect the private dealings of the elite. Meanwhile, internal allegiances, once predictable, began to shift. Individuals who were once loyal to discretion found themselves reassessing priorities. The calculus of risk versus reward had fundamentally changed. Ferguson, it's reported, recognized that her silence was no longer necessarily protective, not just for herself, but for others as well. And in environments where reputation is everything, that recognition can be transformative. One moment, you are a keeper of secrets. The next, you are a participant in a story that could define history. What complicates matters further is Ferguson's unique position. Unlike Prince Andrew or Meghan Markle, her public narrative exists in a liminal space. She is connected to royalty, yet not a central figure, observed, but not always in the spotlight. That position allegedly allowed her to view the alleged pact from a perspective few others could, an outsider-insider lens that makes discretion both a burden and a weapon. But Ferguson is not only a strategist, she is human, and the personal dimension cannot be underestimated. Loyalty, betrayal, regret, and a sense of justice all play a role in decisions that affect how, when, and why one might speak. Allegedly, she was not just calculating reputational outcomes. She was weighing emotional consequences. How does one reconcile years of silence with emerging public narratives? How does one balance personal ethics against social expectation? The decision, insiders suggest, was not made lightly. It was the product of observation, reflection, and timing. Ferguson allegedly waited until she could maximize impact. When her voice could be heard clearly, when her perspective would be unavoidable, and when the silence she had maintained for years could be wielded with strategic precision. And when that moment arrived, according to multiple reports, Ferguson's actions were decisive. She began signaling, testing waters, gauging reactions. Not by publicly revealing the alleged yacht encounter outright, but by framing questions, hinting at knowledge, and emphasizing her unique position to speak authoritatively on matters long hidden. This approach is classic in high-stakes environments. By controlling the narrative of one's involvement, Ferguson could influence perception before anyone else had the chance to react. She could reassert relevance, assert moral authority, and reshape public understanding, all without crossing lines that would expose her to immediate backlash. At the heart of it, what Ferguson allegedly accomplished was a subtle but powerful shift in leverage. By signaling that she might speak, she forced others in the orbit, including Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, according to reports, to reconsider their positions. Their previously assumed security and silence was suddenly in question. And here's the tension. The alleged pact, if it existed, depended entirely on mutual compliance. Break the unspoken rules, and the equilibrium collapses. Ferguson's actions, therefore, were not just personal choices, they were catalysts. And in environments where silence is a binding force, catalysts are dangerous. So what was Ferguson's alleged strategy? First, assert authority. She is uniquely positioned to comment with credibility. Second, manipulate timing. Waiting years allowed her to observe, gather insight, and select the moment when disclosure, or even the threat of disclosure, would have maximum effect. Third, control perception. By speaking strategically, she can frame the conversation, emphasizing motives, ethics, and context rather than just raw allegations. But there's another layer that often goes unspoken: emotional calculus. Those who have followed Ferguson closely note her resilience, tenacity, and ability to navigate scandal. She has faced public humiliation and financial challenges, yet repeatedly emerged with her narrative intact. The alleged decision to speak now can be seen as part of that larger pattern, using experience, timing, and strategy to reclaim agency. And yet, the stakes are high. Allegedly, breaking silence in this context is not without risk. There are reputational consequences, potential legal implications, and the emotional toll of re-engaging with a decade-old controversy. For Ferguson, every word, gesture, and nuance is calculated, measured, and weighed against potential fallout. This is the tension that defines her alleged turning point, the intersection of strategy, ethics, emotion, and timing. By allegedly signaling her willingness to speak, Ferguson is reshaping the narrative landscape. She is reminding those involved, and the public watching, that silence is negotiable, conditional, and fragile. And for audiences, this creates a unique dynamic. We are drawn to the story not merely for scandal, but for insight into human behavior at the highest levels. How do individuals navigate secrecy, power, and morality? How do long-held agreements endure or collapse under pressure? How does one person's decision shift the balance for everyone involved? Allegedly, Ferguson's turning point illustrates these dynamics perfectly. She is at once participant and observer, insider and strategist, protector and disruptor. Her actions, subtle though they may appear, carry enormous consequences. And yet, as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that even her careful maneuvering cannot fully control the chaos. The ripple effects of one decision, once set in motion, expand unpredictably. Relationships are tested, reputations reconsidered, and long-standing narratives rewritten. Which brings us to a pivotal question. If someone like Ferguson, with everything to lose and little to gain, chooses to act, what does that imply about the perceived value and vulnerability of the alleged pact? What does it say about the shifting calculus of silence, risk, and revelation? These are the tensions that will drive our story forward. And in the chapters to come, we will explore not only the alleged pact itself, but the broader implications of breaking silence in an environment where words are weapons and discretion is power. Because according to sources, Ferguson's alleged turning point is more than a personal decision. It is a catalyst, a signal, a harbinger of change that no one involved could ignore. And just when you think the equilibrium might hold, just when it seems the delicate balance of silence is intact, the next move, subtle, strategic, and potentially explosive, is already underway. But what came next would redefine relationships and test loyalties in ways no one saw coming. Imagine standing at the center of intense public scrutiny while knowing that every move you make is dissected, every word you speak is measured, and every silence you maintain is interpreted. This is the world Meghan Markle entered as she navigated her pre-royal life and ultimately her unprecedented position in the British royal orbit. But within that high-pressure environment, the alleged yacht encounter with Prince Andrew introduced a unique dynamic. The intersection of discretion, reputation, and risk management. To understand Meghan's position, we must first appreciate the complexity of her situation in 2010. She was establishing herself in a career as an actress, navigating social networks, and carefully managing public perception. Her image, polished, strategic, and highly visible, was already a form of currency. And like all currency, it had to be protected. A single misstep could carry outsized consequences, particularly when that misstep might intersect with powerful, secretive circles. According to multiple insider accounts, Meghan was aware of the stakes involved in any interaction with high-profile figures. This awareness likely informed her approach to discretion. If the alleged yacht encounter truly occurred, then her silence was not merely compliance, but a calculated decision. By not disclosing, she was actively managing risk. The risk of misinterpretation, reputational harm, or leverage by others. Silence, in this context, is paradoxical. On the one hand, it offers protection. By withholding information, one avoids immediate exposure. On the other hand, silence can be interpreted as complicity or vulnerability. And when your every action is under a microscope, the stakes of both speaking and remaining silent are magnified exponentially. So how does one balance this delicate equation? Experts in media strategy and crisis management often emphasize control. Control of the narrative, control of timing, control of perception. And that is allegedly what Meghan sought to achieve, consciously or unconsciously, in the aftermath of that encounter. Her decisions, her public behavior, and even her private interactions were informed by the need to maintain control in an environment where transparency could be weaponized. The alleged pact with Prince Andrew, therefore, was not simply a social understanding. It was a strategic instrument. By agreeing, even implicitly, to maintain silence, both parties reportedly preserved their ability to shape public narrative in the future. For Meghan, this meant retaining agency over her own story while minimizing exposure to unanticipated consequences. Consider the psychological component. Being bound by silence in such high-stakes scenarios is not neutral. It requires constant calculation. Every meeting, every introduction, every casual comment is filtered through the lens of risk management. Did this conversation potentially reveal too much? Could a casual mention later be misconstrued? What are the ripple effects? These mental exercises, repeated over years, are exhausting. Yet they form the foundation of a strategic approach to self-preservation. Moreover, the alleged encounter occurred at a time when Meghan's profile was growing. The media's attention was increasing, and social media, though not as omnipresent as today, was already a powerful tool for shaping public perception. Being mindful of exposure was critical. Any misstep could be amplified, taken out of context, and potentially weaponized. In that sense, silence was both armor and strategy. But control is rarely absolute. Even the most disciplined narrative management is vulnerable to external shocks. Gossip, leaks, misremembered events. or even the actions of third parties can disrupt carefully laid plans. Allegedly, this is precisely why the silence surrounding the yacht encounter was so valuable. It minimized the number of people capable of introducing variability into the equation. Fewer voices, fewer leaks, fewer variables. Yet the environment was not static. Over the following decade, the factors shaping risk evolved. Meghan's profile grew further, public interest intensified, and scrutiny of the royal family increased. Simultaneously, reputational dynamics surrounding Prince Andrew shifted dramatically. These changes, according to insiders, made the previously mutually beneficial silence increasingly fragile. What once offered protection became, in some ways, a liability. This is where strategic thinking meets emotional intelligence. Allegedly, Meghan's approach to this situation required both careful calculation and self-awareness. Speaking too soon could create backlash, while prolonged silence risked being interpreted as evasiveness. Each option carried potential costs and benefits. In high-stakes circles, the wrong choice can reverberate for years. Additionally, the alleged encounter carried moral and ethical dimensions. It wasn't merely a question of personal risk, but of reputation and integrity. Alleged agreements that bind individuals to silence in morally complex situations require ongoing negotiation, often unspoken, between what is legally permissible, socially expected, and personally acceptable. And herein lies one of the most fascinating aspects of Meghan's position. She was navigating a multi-layered risk environment, balancing personal, professional, and reputational stakes, while also contending with an intricate web of social expectation and scrutiny. Allegedly, this meant maintaining strategic silence while simultaneously monitoring shifts in the environment that could affect her interests. Think of it as a chess game played in real time, with multiple boards, some visible and some hidden. Each decision, each silence, each gesture could influence outcomes not only immediately but years into the future. Allegedly, the yacht encounter introduced a variable that was long-lasting, an unspoken rule whose implications were subtle, yet potentially far-reaching. It's also important to consider leverage. Alleged agreements like this operate on the principle of mutual dependence. Both parties understand that violating the terms could harm everyone involved. But leverage is dynamic. Over time, one participant may gain more power or more influence, and the calculus of risk changes. Insiders claim this may be part of why discussions surrounding the alleged encounter and the pact have resurfaced in recent years. Finally, Meghan's position illustrates the duality of silence, protective yet perilous. Silence shields, but it also constrains. It allows control over narrative, but only until external pressures disrupt equilibrium. When those pressures intensify, as they allegedly did, the decision to maintain silence or speak out becomes one of the most consequential choices imaginable. By examining her position, we gain insight not just into alleged strategic decisions made over a decade ago, but into the broader dynamics of power, discretion, and narrative management. We see how an individual can operate at the intersection of public scrutiny and private understanding, how calculated silence can function as both shield and sword, and how even a single unspoken agreement can shape years of behavior and perception. And just when it seems control is absolute, just when narrative management appears secure, unexpected events, shifting allegiances, or interventions from unexpected actors, such as Sarah Ferguson, threaten to upend everything. Because in high-stakes environments, the balance of control is never permanent, and the next move, as we will see, can transform calculated discretion into a volatile, explosive situation. But what came next would demonstrate just how fragile even the most carefully managed silence could be, and how quickly a single voice could alter the landscape. Imagine carrying a name that opens doors, commands attention, and holds centuries of expectation. And simultaneously knowing that every move you make is under relentless scrutiny. That is the paradox of Prince Andrew. A royal by birth, influential by association, and forever entwined with both privilege and controversy, Andrew's public image has always been a delicate balancing act. And according to multiple sources, the alleged yacht encounter with Meghan Markle introduced an additional layer of complexity, one that would challenge the very foundations of his reputation. To understand this, consider the stakes. A single event, if interpreted unfavorably, has the potential to disrupt decades of public perception. For a royal, reputation is both currency and armor. It protects from criticism, commands respect, and maintains influence. Lose it, and even wealth and status cannot shield you from scrutiny. Reports indicate that following the alleged yacht encounter, Andrew's silence, or compliance with the alleged pact, became critical. In theory, maintaining discretion protected him from exposure, rumors, or misinterpretation. But as we know, silence is not a static defense. It relies on mutual understanding and trust. And when either of those falters, vulnerability emerges. Consider the psychological tension. Living under the constant gaze of public opinion while navigating high-profile connections is inherently stressful. Add the weight of an alleged unspoken agreement, and the stakes become both personal and professional. Each interaction must be carefully considered. A joke misread, a casual gesture scrutinized, or a comment leaked to the press can magnify consequences. Insiders describe this as a constant mental calculus, weighing the benefit of action against the potential fallout. Now, juxtapose this with the evolving media landscape. From 2010 onwards, the rise of social media, 24-hour news cycles, and a culture of instantaneous judgment magnified the impact of any perceived misstep. Allegedly, this environment increased the pressure on Andrew to adhere strictly to silence regarding the yacht encounter. The consequences of deviation were amplified. The margin for error shrank. Yet even within these pressures, leverage exists. Silence, as we've seen, is not merely avoidance, it's strategy. By adhering to the unspoken agreement, Andrew maintained a level of control over narrative. He limited exposure, minimized speculation, and theoretically protected his reputation from immediate harm. But leverage is fragile. It shifts with perception, context, and time. And according to sources, the calculus changed as new scrutiny emerged from other corners of his life. Complicating matters further is the interplay between public and private perception. In royal circles, image is often managed meticulously, yet privately, behavior and relationships may differ. Alleged agreements, such as the Yacht Silence Pact, operate in this liminal space. They are simultaneously personal, social, and strategic. Violating them can have consequences beyond the immediate parties. It can ripple through family dynamics, public perception, and media narratives. Reports suggest that Andrew's position has long been complicated by prior controversies, which amplified the impact of any new allegations or revelations. His public narrative has faced scrutiny over legal, social, and reputational challenges. In such a context, even a minor breach of discretion can cascade, intensifying public and institutional attention. Allegedly, this is why maintaining the alleged pact with Meghan Markle was not only desirable, but perceived as critical to reputation management. However, silence can become a double-edged sword. While it shields from immediate exposure, it can also create suspicion. In high-profile situations, absence of commentary is often interpreted as admission, complicity, or avoidance. Insiders indicate that this creates ongoing pressure. The longer silence is maintained, the greater the potential for misinterpretation or rumor to flourish. Andrew's alleged calculus, then, involved balancing multiple forces: the protective value of silence, the potential for speculation, the ethical and emotional weight of discretion, and the evolving dynamics of public scrutiny. In other words, every decision was a high-stakes negotiation with both the past and the present. Further complicating the situation is leverage from external actors. People like Sarah Ferguson, who occupy a unique position within the royal orbit, have the ability to shift the equilibrium. Allegedly, her willingness to speak, even indirectly, introduces a new variable into Andrew's previously controlled environment. When one participant in a delicate system signals potential disclosure, the implications for everyone else are immediate. This creates a tension familiar to crisis management experts. Silence is effective only when mutual trust exists. The moment trust falters, through shifting alliances, leaks, or the calculated signals of others, the previously stable system becomes volatile. Allegedly, this is precisely what has made Andrew's situation increasingly precarious. It's also essential to consider perception versus reality. Public narratives are constructed not solely from facts, but from perception, interpretation, and emphasis. Andrew's alleged adherence to the Yacht Silence Pact, while protective in theory, is interpreted in multiple ways by observers. Some see prudence, others see complicity, some see strategic calculation, others perceive avoidance. This multiplicity of perception further complicates his ability to manage reputation effectively. Another factor is timing. Allegedly, the value of maintaining silence was highest when media cycles were slower, public scrutiny less intense, and internal systems of discretion robust. As these conditions evolved, faster news cycles, greater interest in royal affairs, and shifting alliances, the protective value of silence diminished. In essence, a tool that once defended his reputation risked becoming a trap. Furthermore, reputation in high-profile environments is cumulative. Every interaction, public appearance, and statement contributes to a larger narrative. Allegedly, even minor signals, a shift in tone, a carefully worded comment, a delayed response, can influence perception of past events. Maintaining discretion about the alleged yacht encounter thus required constant vigilance, strategic foresight, and meticulous communication management. Ultimately, Prince Andrew's position exemplifies the fragility of high-stakes reputation management. Silence, while valuable, is never absolute. Leverage shifts. Alliances evolve. Pressures accumulate. Alleged agreements, no matter how carefully maintained, are vulnerable to disruption. And when that disruption occurs, the ripple effects can be profound, affecting not just the individual, but the broader network of relationships, perceptions, and narratives. In this context, the alleged Yacht Silence Pact becomes more than a personal understanding. It is a lens through which to view the broader challenges of discretion, risk management, and public perception at the highest levels. Andrew's experience illustrates the constant negotiation between visibility and privacy, action and restraint, speech and silence. And as we will see in the following chapters, the environment around Andrew, the shifting loyalties, rising scrutiny, and potential interventions by others, creates conditions where the previously stable system of silence is tested. One unexpected move, one subtle signal, one calculated disclosure has the potential to upend years of careful management. Because in high-stakes worlds like this, no silence lasts forever. And when it begins to crack, the consequences are unpredictable, often explosive, and capable of reshaping reputations, alliances, and narratives permanently. But what came next would introduce forces that neither Andrew nor Meghan could fully control. Forces that would challenge the very foundation of discretion they had relied upon for over a decade. In the world of high-profile figures, information is power, but power is fragile. One misstep, one unintended disclosure, and the carefully constructed narrative can collapse in an instant. The alleged yacht encounter between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, and the long-standing silence surrounding it, offers a perfect case study in how media dynamics amplify stakes, shape perception, and create vulnerabilities that even discretion cannot fully contain. Let's start with the basics, the media environment of the last decade. By 2010, the landscape had already shifted dramatically. Traditional outlets operated alongside a growing network of online platforms, blogs, and social media channels. News traveled faster, opinions spread farther, and leaks, whether intentional or accidental, had unprecedented reach. Information no longer moved linearly. It ricocheted across platforms, often beyond the control of those who were its subjects. For individuals like Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, this meant that silence, while protective in private circles, was increasingly vulnerable to external pressures. Even if the alleged pact on the yacht held internally, the risk of exposure from external sources, journalists, acquaintances, or third parties, remained ever-present. Leaks operate in two forms, accidental and intentional. Accidental leaks often arise from misremembered conversations, inadvertent slips, or misinterpreted gestures. Intentional leaks, however, are strategic. They are deployed to test reactions, manipulate perception, or shift leverage. According to insiders, both types of leaks have shaped the narratives around the alleged yacht encounter over the years, even before Sarah Ferguson's alleged involvement became public. The media amplifies these dynamics in unique ways. Headlines condense complex stories into provocative phrases. Tweets spread interpretations rapidly, often detached from nuance. Analysts dissect actions and statements, layering speculation on top of speculation. In this environment, the private decision to remain silent becomes not a shield but a lens through which every perceived omission is scrutinized. Consider the role of timing. In media strategy, timing is everything. Stories dropped too early can flare and fade. Stories delayed can emerge with greater impact. Allegedly, the participants in the yacht encounter, and those around them, have had to manage not just the content of information but also its timing. Even hints, carefully calibrated, can create ripple effects that influence public perception and strategic positioning. Furthermore, narratives are rarely linear. Once an allegation or rumor enters the media ecosystem, it evolves. Early reports can be incomplete or inaccurate, yet they establish frames of reference that persist even after correction. For those maintaining silence, this creates a continuous challenge. The story is no longer theirs to control, and each public reaction or reinterpretation introduces new variables into an already complex system. Media pressure also introduces psychological stress. Being constantly scrutinized, aware that even silence can be interpreted as guilt or complicity, heightens anxiety and forces participants to anticipate scrutiny at all times. Sources close to the alleged events suggest that Meghan, Prince Andrew, and others have had to navigate this stress strategically, balancing public engagement with private discretion. Social media further complicates matters. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram democratize access to information, enabling instant commentary from anyone with an account. While these platforms empower some individuals, they also magnify the consequences of leaks, rumors, and speculation. Allegedly, even minor hints about the yacht encounter could trigger viral attention, transforming private discretion into a public spectacle. The media factor also intersects with institutional narratives. Royal communications teams, publicists, and legal advisors operate to mitigate exposure, control framing, and manage perception. Yet, even these measures have limits. Once information leaks, intentionally or accidentally, the media ecosystem reacts independently, often reshaping the story in unpredictable ways. The alleged yacht encounter, shielded for years by silence, exists in this precarious tension between control and chaos. Moreover, the media amplifies emotional stakes. Public discourse is not only about facts, but about perception, outrage, sympathy, and narrative coherence. Silence, in this context, becomes loaded with meaning, interpreted as prudence by some, avoidance by others, or complicity by many. This multiplicity of interpretation increases pressure on those maintaining discretion and heightens the potential consequences of any shift in the status quo. Another dimension is strategic signaling. Insiders indicate that carefully placed hints or controlled disclosures can be used to gauge reactions, test narratives, or influence leverage. Sarah Ferguson's alleged involvement, signaling willingness to speak but not fully disclosing, is an example of such a tactic. By manipulating perception within the media ecosystem, insiders can influence both public narrative and private calculations simultaneously. Timing, perception, and interpretation are all interconnected. A single article, social media post, or casual comment can cascade, influencing legal considerations, social standing, and personal relationships. Allegedly, this is why the silence surrounding the alleged yacht encounter was maintained with such vigilance. Once information enters the media ecosystem, it cannot be fully contained. Furthermore, media narratives are shaped by expectation. Audiences anticipate drama, conflict, and revelation. As such, even subtle hints or indirect references are magnified, generating speculation, analysis, and commentary that amplify perceived stakes. Allegedly, participants like Meghan and Prince Andrew have had to manage not just content, but expectation, carefully navigating how their behavior might be interpreted in the court of public opinion. The media factor also demonstrates the fragility of silence. Even if no formal disclosure occurs, speculation alone can create pressure points. Leaks, rumors, and partial hints can shift dynamics, forcing responses, recalibrations, and strategic decisions. Allegedly, This interplay has been a persistent element in the broader narrative of the alleged yacht encounter, shaping behavior, influencing decisions, and maintaining tension over years. Ultimately, media dynamics illustrate a critical point. Silence, while powerful, is never absolute. External forces, from journalists to social platforms to public discourse, continuously interact with private decisions, creating a complex ecosystem of risk, perception, and influence. In such an environment, even carefully maintained discretion can be tested, challenged, and disrupted. And as the story unfolds, the alleged yacht silence pact begins to collide with these forces. Sarah Ferguson's signals, combined with rising media scrutiny and shifting narratives, set the stage for disruption. Silence, once protective, becomes increasingly fragile. The balance of discretion and exposure is under strain. Because in this high-stakes arena, information does not merely inform, it transforms. It shifts leverage, alters perception, and redefines relationships. And as the next chapters will reveal, the media factor would play a decisive role in escalating tension, exposing vulnerabilities, and challenging long-held assumptions about silence, control, and reputation. But what came next would push all parties into uncharted territory and expose just how volatile even the most carefully maintained agreements can be. Every high-stakes story has a tipping point, a moment when alliances fracture, loyalties are tested, and the previously stable order begins to unravel. In the saga surrounding the alleged yacht encounter between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, insiders claim that such a tipping point emerged when Sarah Ferguson allegedly began signaling a willingness to speak. What makes this moment pivotal is not just her intent, but the way it disrupted the intricate web of trust, discretion, and mutual understanding that had supposedly governed silence for over a decade. To understand this, we need to examine the nature of loyalty in elite circles. Loyalty is rarely absolute. It is conditional, dynamic, and influenced by factors ranging from personal ethics to public pressure to strategic advantage. In theory, the alleged yacht pact relied on mutual loyalty, both parties recognizing the protective value of discretion. But once external actors begin to signal intentions, that loyalty is put under strain. Insiders describe the situation like a carefully balanced scale. For years, silence maintained equilibrium. Each participant had a vested interest in the other's compliance. But when Ferguson allegedly intervened, even subtly, she introduced a variable that changed the balance.